Hi everyone, welcome back after our break. Hope you all got your cup of teas and everything ready. We have a unique session for you now. Uh, we have a panel discussion, and if you're aware, we had on this particular panel discussion, we will be discussing about the challenges that you have. Now, we have received a lot of questions sent by a lot of you attendees. These questions are what would be discussed on the panel. So, without wasting any more time, I'm going to invite our first panel member, Mr. Pranav Gadre. Pranav is an experienced professional with over 2 decades of experience in the life sciences industry on pharma IT and IT compliance. His specialization is in CSV, GAMP5, 21 CFR Part 11, data integrity, data privacy, quality management systems, and automation. He is the co-chairman of ISPE India's GAMP steering committee and has participated in multiple forums and conferences as a speaker and as a panel member. Currently, he is the global head of quality e-compliance and CSV function at Piramal Pharma. So, Pranav, welcome to the second annual Computer Software Assurance 2022.
Thanks, Darshan. Thanks for the introduction.
Great. Our next panel member is Mr. Rajeev Bedage. Rajiv is an experienced quality professional currently heading the manufacturing IT, CSV, and IT compliance at Lupin. He has hands-on experience in CSV and e-compliance of manufacturing, laboratory, engineering, and quality systems of formulation, API sites, R&D, and PEC. He has worked on validation and implementation of enterprise systems like Empower, LIMS, TMS, eBPR, TrackWise, SAP, etc. And before Lupin, he has worked with reputed and regulatory approved companies like Cipla, Sandoz, Glenmark Pharma, and Apotex Incorporation. Rajiv, welcome to the second annual Computer Software Assurance 2022.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Darshan. Thanks for introduction.
Okay. Our third panel member today is Mr. Divin Pruthi. He's a strategic IT transformation leader with over 15 years of experience in partnering with senior and executive management in ensuring alignment of business strategies, operational processes, and technology. He's got a broad range of experience in technology strategy, process improvements, mobility management, risk frameworks, mergers and acquisitions, and separations. Divin, welcome to the panel, the second annual Computer Software Assurance 2022.
Thanks, Darshan.
Great. And you already met our moderator before. He's had a wonderful session with us. He shared a lot of information. Please welcome on stage our moderator, Mr. Sachin Bandari.
Hello everyone. Good evening once again.
Great. Sachin, sir, I'm just going to hand this over to you. I think currently we are unable to see your camera.
So, is it any better now?
Great. We can see you now, yes.
Hi Pranav. Hi Devin. Hi Rajeev.
Hi, Sachin.
Hi.
Hi, guys.
Hello, everyone.
Good to see all my good friends on the same table after a long time. And
Yeah,
Yeah, first of all, I like to thank everyone, for having me here. Sachin, thanks for moderating. Pranav, Rajiv, it's good to see all the industry leaders coming together on a very important topic.
yeah. I
fantastic.
think first, yeah, as Sachin mentioned, I think this is the first time. I mean, we keep on chatting on the WhatsApp and all, but this is the forum. WhatsApp chats are becoming on the forum now. Yeah, thank you, guys. Thank you.
I think
So
hopefully very soon we will be meeting in person. I think with the kind of trend which is reducing for pandemic.
yeah.
Yeah, sure,
Guys.
sure. Yeah,
In fact, when this conference was being perceived, there was a discussion with Suryansh and everyone. So I requested, again that let's get guys who actually make it happen in India. And I'm so fortunate to moderate the panel with the best minds in CSP right on the same table. And everyone on the call, I must say that you guys are fortunate that you are going to hear from the best of the guys who are actually making it happen on ground. There's some background noise.
Yeah, I think your voice is echoing a bit. Sachin. I don't know whether it's same with me.
Is it any better?
yeah. This is better now.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all the participants, we have about 21, 26 people on the session. So, this is in continuation to what has been happening since morning today. So, you have heard a lot of speakers in the since morning, including uh, Damodar and everyone. So, what I'm going to do now is that we have picked up some questions which came in the discussion today morning, and the idea of this next 1 hour of session is primarily to ask questions on your behalf to Pranav, Rajiv, and Devin, and they will share their real life experiences in trying to get you solutions to questions which you might be having while putting CSA in action. So till now we have been hearing, what is CSA, how good it is, the elephant will come, it will dance, it will, sing for you. But now let's see how elephant actually enters the room. So let's get into that. So the first question and the one of the most important ones I'm going to ask is, and this is for you, Pranav, and of course, I would request Devin and Rajiv to pitch in as it, they feel it appropriate. So the question is, what is the organization readiness required to prepare for CSA? We've been talking that we need to have CSA. How does an organization prepare itself to go ahead with CSA? And I would request you, Pranav, to cover this at least in three of the areas. What are the changes in QMS we have to look forward to? What are the key systems we need to deploy? And what is the readiness in terms of people we need to do? Over to you, Pranav, and then Rajiv and Devin, please pitch in as
Yeah.
required.
Thanks, Sachin. And I think that's a good question and a very practical one too. But while answering, right, so I will like to maybe reverse the order a bit. I think you mentioned about three aspects: change in QMS, deployment of systems, and people. I would like to take the people part first because I think that is the most important, right? So I think change in culture and organizational change management, both related to people, is something which we should start with first as a prerequisite, I would say. So frankly, today even CSV is not much ingrained into our fabric, and many times people follow it blindly or because CSV team is forcing them to do, and that's why our business teams or other functions do it. Okay, so now suddenly if we go and tell them that, oh, we are now starting a new methodology in which there is less documentation, more testing, people will come back and say, oh, that's what we have been telling you all along, that we don't want to do documentation. So I think messaging it is very important. Okay, we need to pass the message very clearly that CAC is not an escape route to less documentation or validation, but it means that we need to do more critical thinking, more of testing, unscripted though, and that will lead to less documentation. So I believe, Sachin, you also mentioned in your earlier session today that CSA should not be adopted to avoid documentation, right? So I think that is aspect which we need to consider if we want to implement CSA in our organization. The people part of it, that should be the prerequisite. The next, I think, aspect which you asked me to cover is the change in QMS. So I think even Munish answered that in his session when he presented on challenges and solutions for adoption of CSA, right? So as per me, the processes, as in the SOP and the related work instructions, will definitely need a change to reflect the new approach and new methodology. But I think the overall quantum of the templates like URS, FRS, or IQ, OQ, PQ, so those will remain the same, though maybe the content would reduce or maybe change, but the quantum of templates pretty much should remain the same even if we adopt CSA. And I think the more focus will be on risk assessment, obviously. So like supplier assessment, functional risk assessment. So that will be the focus areas where we are required to do the critical thinking. So from that perspective, the QMS, there will be changes, though other elements like change controls, deviations, discrepancies will continue to be the same. So not much changes expected in the QMS apart from the process changes that we want to adopt as part of CSA. The third one is deployment of systems. So for that, again, I don't think that any organization who wish to embark on the journey of CSA has to deploy any new systems or any new requirements from hardware software perspective. So there are many lifecycle management tools again, which I think Sachin you covered earlier, which are already configured to implement CSA. So I have seen a couple of them recently. So they are coming with this new offering that okay, you can do a CSA using our tool, where I think the risk assessment can be done and the level of testing can be determined, like whether it's unscripted unscripted or scripted or other things. So I think you can leverage those if required. But again, that is, I don't think, a prerequisite if an organization wants to adopt a CSA. So I hope I have covered all the three aspects, Sachin, of the question sufficiently. But I would definitely request.
Well, Sachin, I would like to add to what Pranav just mentioned. I think Pranav put it right on the paper. Uh, there is also an approach that you need to have on the mindset when you are adopting CSA. That social fabric is very important, because now you're not, if you're going for unscripted testing, you're not putting in a lot of screenshots or evidences. However, while doing so, there is some level of discipline that we should expect from our testers. While testing the each of your steps, you should document at least, if you're not taking screenshot, on what you did. So we face certain challenges when we were implementing CSA in my previous organization. The discipline was not there. It used to be like, we checked it, it's fine. But what did you check? That's something which should definitely go on. So discipline around at least giving in some details is very important for you to succeed in this approach.
Sure, Devin. Rajiv, any thoughts before I move to the next question?
Yeah, I agree what Pranav mentioned with respect to the sequence of pointers he put a brief about, because see, people is the biggest factor in this entire CSA thought process, how we are looking at it. Because this CSA is, I would look at it little differently. Is like CSA is not something new coming in, right? This is something which was already there in the existence. This is only about how we look at the validation, how do we look at the documentation coming from the vendor, how do we look at the processes what we have in our environment, how do we manage the quality processes around this validation. So this is all about, it is existing available in the environment. It is only about how do we take it further from there, and how, because we were totally into the CSV, like it is a conventional way of, like, we have to validate each and every software coming into the environment, right? But when we talk about the CSA, we have to make sure it is not only about validating, it is about making sure what we are validating and putting into the use, it is connecting very much clearly with respect to my process what we are implementing, and it is not having any risk with respect to product, patient, and the data integrity aspect. So I would look at it as it is available as it is today also, but how do we strengthen it further going forward? Yeah.
Okay. Great insight. Thank you, gentlemen, for this. And I'll just quickly summarize for everybody's belief what Pranav, Devin, and Rajiv said is that the most important is a change of mindset. We need to embark on the journey of thinking critically and challenging ourselves continuously. And Devin said we need to primarily have more discipline. Like if you're expected to keep your screenshots or expected to follow certain discipline while executing CSA, that becomes an important thing. In terms of changes in QMS, our leaders said that we have to make certain changes in few of the SOPs, and as mentioned in the morning as well today, primarily your risk assessments and your testing strategies are the two SOPs which would be impacted the most. And in terms of deployment of systems, there are many tools in the market, and you should have an inclination to adopt few of those tools. And the pharma companies primarily have been adverse to go for automation in terms of testing and all, but that inhibition should go away now. And that's what our leaders said. Moving on to the next one, and one of a very important questions which is being asked in various forums, and very interesting one. And I'm sure my colleague Pranav will have a lot of thoughts on it. But I'll still invite Rajiv to start. The regulations on CSA is still not out. Can we still go for it, Rajiv?
I think just now I mentioned the same pointer here. So
Yeah.
this is a very big topic which we are hearing in the industry around like last 2.5 years, so 3 years maybe 2018-19 we are hearing there is some CSA kind of guidance is coming in. But even though we do not have the guidance available and all, but still we are having multiple discussions, forums, seminars, webinars are happening. So as I mentioned, this is something which is not a new approach or something. It is already available. How do we manage currently the CSV? How do we ensure we don't overdo? And it is, we don't only look at the audit per se, saying how do we explain these things to the auditors and all. We should really look at how it strengthens my quality and the process what we have implemented as a part of validation. And it should be more around strengthening the patient data and integrity and the product quality aspects, rather than just looking at approach change or some new guidance coming in. So that is what I would quickly mention, saying this is not something new coming in. It is about how do we look at it, the critical thinking, whether we really assess the risk associated with the system, with respect to functionalities, with respect to the regulatory requirements, or with respect to my product and all related aspects associated with that. So that is a key part I would look at it. So rather looking at the only whether guidance coming in, not coming in, how are we strengthening current CSV, which makes a lot of sense in implementing and adopting that practice and the approach.
Okay, thanks, Rajiv. Before I go to Pranav for last word, I would like to hear from you, Devin. Any thoughts on that? Because the policies were not there.
Yeah, I completely agree with Rajiv. It's nothing new that we are doing. It's just like a little bit shift in our mindset. And again, I would also not call it a shift. I would say that with CSA, the system centricity is back rather than it is document centricity. It's always about system. I mean, you have certain requirements, you are digitizing it through a system, you're meeting those requirements, but in the process you need to ensure that those controls are inbuilt, which ensures your product quality, patient safety, and data integrity. Now, how you ensure that is something which part 11 doesn't talk about. You go to industry standards to ensure that, and that's why we have CAM 5. The level of documentation now is coming out of your risk assessments, which becomes a very important document now, for CSA. We have been talking about risk methodologies. We have been talking about risk-based validations. With CSA, I think it's giving us more focus on the risk assessments again, and ensuring that we don't overdo things.
Yeah.
Thanks, Devin, for this. Pranav, since you also co-chair ISP India GAMP, maybe you want to just talk about a bit of GAMP.
Yeah, so see, I would thanks Sachin, and I would not like to call CSA as a new methodology itself. I will say that a smart validation engineer doing CSV is CSA. Okay, so it's like anyone who has spent time in validation and like has knowledge of what validation is all about. I think he or she doing validation in the smart way is what CSA is. Okay, so as Rajiv and Devin also said rightly, it's nothing new. We have always knew that it is a risk-based approach. ISP GAM version 5 says that it is a risk-based approach. Now maybe I think there is a different, maybe I would say a color given to it, and that's why I think everyone is jumping on the CSA thing. But it's nothing different. It's same as what we did in past as CSV. As Devin said, it's more focus on systems, and I think primarily we need to put product quality and patient centricity, patient safety in the center. I think if we do that and if we do validation, that's what CSA is all about. So I won't be too
Just
worried, Sachin. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I won't be too worried like if the guidance is out or it is not out, when it is coming out. I think if we do CSV smartly, we are already doing CSV. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
And just to add, Pranav, yeah, just to add here, see, if you look at the leveraging of the validation documents coming from the vendor, this is not something which is coming in as a part of CSA, right? This existed in the environment for many couple of years, and if you see that, so nobody is stopping us to leverage those documents to make sure we don't redo something which is already established by the OEMs or the vendors, right? So that is also one of the piece of your CSA approach, where if you precisely talk about the current environment what we have, and if you look at the deliverables, what Pranav mentioned and Devin also mentioned, so the deliverables are not going to change, right? We need to have the URS in place. We need to have the risk assessment. We need to have all the specification in place, right? We have to have all the installation qualifications, operational performance has to be done. So how do we make sure that we don't overdo in all the aspects? Let's say when vendor is already established those testings and the functionalities, do we really need to do it again?
Yeah.
Same thing, yeah. Similarly, this is all about the vendor leveraging. Now second topic, let's say we have implemented any one system at one of the locations or any one location where it is existing, let's say XYZ version of the software is available, and if we are buying the same software again into the other location or the same location, do we really need to do everything again? So that is nothing but my CSA approach, right? I have to leverage what exists in my environment and make sure it is there, it is appropriate. So I'll just look at the things which needs to be verified as a part of the new piece coming in, new equipment coming in, or new software coming in as a part of variability. Otherwise all the things which are existing, they exist as it is and we can very well leverage them. So
Yeah.
I do not see it as a totally different shift. It is existing. how do we, as Pranav, I totally agree with you. One smart CSV engineer, if he does it smartly as a CSV, we are there. We don't have to wait for the guidance coming in.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Rajiv, for that insight and everyone else. So primarily what our panelists are saying is that CSA is nothing new as such, and there is no need to wait for any guidance to come in. CSA, if I can, I'm just trying to use a slang there. It's something like a root shock, telling you that guys, this is what I expected you to do 15 years ago, and now I'm telling you again to do it. Risk-based testing or risk-based approach has always been the buzzword, but we somehow, in the duration of doing all of these things, we forgot, and CSA is just reminding us again to do that. So, thank you, panelists, for this one. And with that, just for everyone's information's sake, I'll repeat the answer to this particular question. You need not wait for any regulations to come in. CSA is nothing but using the same thing in a more diligent way. And Pranav made a very interesting statement. Anybody who does CSV in a sensible way is already doing CSA. So that's about it. Okay, so the next question is to you, Devin, and I know your expertise into the software areas, SaaS and related areas. How do you strategize CSA?
Sachin, can you repeat, please? Somehow your voice was not clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just request everyone to mute. There is some cross connection issue.
Now it's better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, how do we strategize CSA in SaaS environment? SaaS, for those who don't know, is software as a service. How do we strategize CSA in SaaS environment, or in cases when the vendor is qualified but does not give a lot of documentation? Like SAP is one of the vendors. I'll just elaborate the question for everyone's sake before you answer, Devin. So nowadays, with the internet getting cheaper and bandwidth becoming more and more available, industry is trending towards going for software as a service or pay as you use kind of software or cloud-based software. Now, in those cases, since it is not in your premises, you have a little control over the QMS. You have to leverage with whatever vendor gives you. And the problem is that CSA's primary principle is vendor management or using the vendor documents. Now, in SaaS, a lot of vendors don't give you too much of documentation, even though they are qualified. An example we have taken is an SAP, or you can consider any cloud-based application. Over to you, Devin. How do we use
Right.
in those areas?
Right, Sachin. So, I mean, vendor QMS becomes a key part here, because in SaaS, as Sachin also mentioned, you don't have lot of control in here. So you need to ensure that the processes that the vendor is using to ensure that the system remains in a qualified or validated state are in there. For example, you go ahead, you do an audit of your vendor, and you see everything is in good shape. However, going forward, there are changes to that software. And if those changes are not validated or qualified, that means it's having an impact on the software that you are using, which is as a service now. So that becomes a very important aspect. Again, everything ties back to your risk assessment. I can give you two examples of softwares where a lot of industries are using it as a SaaS model. One is your regulatory databases. Companies like Viva are coming in with new offerings where your ECDD filings would be done through a cloud-based solution. Now that has a lot of impact on your product quality and patient safety. So these are high-risk areas. On the other hand, you have softwares like your CMDBs, for example, ServiceNow, etc., where you are managing your inventory, right? So the direct impact on your product quality and patient safety is not there per se. So you'll have to be very uh, vigilant. You have to be very smart when you are doing your risk assessments to ensure that the product that you are buying, what kind of documentation you need from your vendor. And if those are high risk systems, vendor documentation is a must. If it's not there, then of course you'll have to create that document. There is no escape path to that, or there are no shortcuts to that. You need to ensure that all your risks are taken care of and are mitigated. So that would be my take on it. Go through your risk assessments, and if you are not getting documentation, then please ensure that you are creating that documentation. and bring in some discipline, bring in that social fabric within your organization, where you need to ensure that the controls are in place and all of the risks are mitigated appropriately.
Thanks, Evan. Any thoughts on that, Rajiv? I'll start with you and then I'll go to Pranav.
Yeah, so one point, as Devin mentioned, so as a part of vendor selection itself, we have to have proper due diligence to be done with respect to whether do we have a appropriate QMS management process in place with respect with vendor. Do they have a appropriate SDLC followed across for the implement any new releases and the upgrades coming in? Because see, what will happen is when we shortlist and finalize the vendor, and we come to know that after 3 months or 6 months they are coming up with some updates and the patches coming into the system, then you will only get a communication saying we will be updating this patch into the environment, and this will be made live in next 45 days or 30 days or kind of whatever period for each vendor. So what is left with you as an organization is you have to look at your policies, SOPs, what has been defined to address and handle that as an ongoing operational phase of the system, right? That is one piece. Second is with respect to at every change coming in, is it that every time possible for as an organization to go back and change those validate those changes coming into the environment? Many of the times not necessary all the things we can test as a change coming in, right? There are couple of things which as a end user what we will be accessing as an organization are some extent doable, but remaining majority things we will not be able to access those because it's either sitting in the cloud and which are controlled by the admin of those OEMs. So those are the few challenges which I see as a part of SaaS implementations, and how do we adopt that for our routine operational phase.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. My take, I think so. Most of the things are covered by Devin and Rajiv, and I don't want to repeat again the same things. But I think the risk assessment, the strategy should be to shift left. I think if we go to SaaS model, the risk management, risk assessment has to shift left, which means that when we do the assessment of the vendor itself, that time I think most of the risk have to be addressed or rather looked into and mitigated. So if we do that job correctly, I think then I think it would not be much of a hassle to implement any SaaS-based technologies onto your as per your requirements. So I think that supplier assessment, ensuring their QMS is robust. I think as Raju mentioned, like if they keep on giving you patches and upgrades, how they are managing those changes internally, whether they have the same instance for all their clients or are there different instances, how it will be done for your specific instance. So all those questions needs to be checked and answered as part of your risk assessment strategy during supplier assessment. So if those things are done correctly, then I see there is not much risk involved in going ahead with such partners or for such technologies. That's what my take on this is.
Thanks. So,
Correct.
let's just
I like to add one more point here, Sachin, before you summarize. The periodic reviews also become a key aspect here. Ensuring QMS during your supplier evaluation is a must, and I think that is the key. However, ensuring that the QMS is working appropriately and effectively, I think periodic review strategy should also be implemented by organizations in a more rigorous way now with SaaS coming in.
Okay, thanks, Devin, for that. Just a quick summary. What the panelists said today was that before you go for any SaaS-based system, make sure that your vendor assessment happens thoroughly and you specifically address the situations in your QMS before you go live. Say for applications like track and trace, where there is a change happening every 15 days or 20 days, you cannot end up validating those changes, and they will not wait for you to validate it. It's on you. How do you devise your strategy, risk assessment, and even specifically stressed on having the right risk assessments in place and appropriate documentation to support it. I'll just add one point here from my side on this is that when you're using applications such as SaaS, wherein you don't have a lot of control when a change would be deployed, at that point of time, there are two things which you should be doing. One is that also when you're doing a vendor assessment, look at what are the certifications and methodologies vendor is following. In some cases, wherein the vendor is hosting the application in a good, a very good data center, and they have a lot of protections around it. At least security is taken care of. if they say that okay, we have a very good change management system, and the changes reports are automatically generated and stored at a particular place. Like I know of one of the applications. So what they do is that whenever they have a change, they will execute a change management a procedure which ensures that before change is deployed to the production, 10 days before that change going into the system, they run a script and it generates all the test scripts and stores it at a place, and they give you an intimation, my change is ready. And in that case, your QMS should be capable enough that you acknowledge, accept, and review those test scripts which are available at that location before actually change goes on. So then comes a important keyword which Devin mentioned is the discipline. So you should have a discipline that the moment you get the notification, you guys should go and check the test evidences which are there. So quite a insightful thought. And before I go to the next question, to all the participants on the call, you have a Q&A tab on your screen, and you please use that to ask questions if there's anything else, or if there is any question you want me to ask on your behalf to the panelists, please put your questions there. I am not going to check the chat box, but the question and answer session, I'll keep taking the question answer section, and I'll try to take up your questions with the panelists. There is an interesting question that does CSA defines anything about digital versus manual documentation? What type of tests to be verified based on business and regulatory requirements? And this comes from P. Balakrishna, Senior Manager from Gland Pharma. Can I request one of the panelists to please answer this one? It's there on your screen now.
So, apologies, I am not able to read the entire question, but whatever I could gather, I'll try to answer it best of my capability. Documentation, whether it's digital or manual, doesn't matter. I mean, either you are doing it on paper, if I'm getting the question correctly, or you are doing it through a tool. It's basically you are ensuring that whatever your risk assessment is or whatever your testing strategy is appropriately captured, and accordingly you are ensuring the system is behaving. So this will be my take, that shouldn't define, CSA shouldn't define your digital or manual documentation strategy. However, it goes and touches on what all you should test, and that will come from your risk assessment. So all your high risk requirements, all your requirements where you are doing customizations, you have to ensure that you are capturing all the details. For requirements which are out of the box and low risk, when I say low risk, they're not impacting product quality or patient safety, you can have an approach where you can do scriptless testing, but you have to have certain details around it. What did the tester look into, and if you have those details, I think you are well covered. So that would be my take on it.
Yeah. So I agree with Devin what he said. So I
Great.
think whether it's sorry.
Go ahead, Devin. Sorry, go ahead, Pranav.
Okay. Yeah. So I think even I am not able to see the question in totality. I think only the first half is visible. But yeah, I think what I understand is it's about digital or manual documentation. So I don't think it doesn't really matter, because I think one thing which we all need to remember is that the regulations say the what part. They just say that, okay, you need to ensure that your systems are validated for intended use. How you do it is up to an organization, whether you do it digitally or using manual documentation. The regulations never enforce you to do it in a certain way. Though definitely from US FDA perspective, I think they do promote more digitization and more automation, but that's not a mandate from compliance perspective. So it's up to your organization how you want to adopt it, whether it's manual or digital, but it's not a regulatory requirement either ways. The second of Sachin, I am not able to read through, so I don't know what is
So
the
yeah,
second of.
I'll read it for you, gentlemen. This is what type of to be verified based on business and regulatory requirements. We are getting some very interesting questions. So this is, I think I'll take this one, Pranav. What type of test to be verified? So what type of testing should be determined by the proximity, as I mentioned in the morning. What is the proximity of the software to the quality? Based on that, you determine what kind of testing you go on. If it is a high risk functionality or a critical functionality, go for a regression testing, complete negative, positive, and all. And if it is just a verification of an existing functionality, you can do a unscripted testing or a positive testing. So that's an answer. But I have a very, very interesting question, and this is something which probably even I've been struggling for quite a lot of time. And this comes from Mr. Pankaj Patil, Associate Vice President CQA from Ajanta Pharma. And we have been talking about challenge about using vendors documents. Now, when you go to the shop floor, and I'll read the question for you, Divin and everyone else, or maybe you can scroll it on your screen, then you'll be able to read it as well. But just
Yes.
yeah. So the question is, the challenge with equipment manufacturers is that they buy software from third party where there is no quality assessment and they are not able to support software related issues. How to handle such cases? So what at the I mean, I'll just elaborate for everyone. The challenge here is that we have been talking about leveraging vendor documents. Now, when I go to the especially engineering equipment on the floor, the equipment manufacturers, they engage a third party to write a software for them. There is no quality check, and the documentation which they give us most of the time, it is not too useful. So how do you handle these situations?
I think this is a common problem across industries, and each one of us have faced it. So there is no direct answers to it. As I would say, I mean, we all understand software is just a part of the equipment. The overall equipment has lot many more functionalities. However, to control the equipment, there is an automated control device which is attached to it. If the software which is running on it and we do not have a lot of vendor documentation, we cannot ensure if it passed all the validation checks that we needed to, then the only aspect that we are left with is trying to validate it to ourselves. Again, all this has to be tied up with your risk assessment. You need to ensure that your risks are appropriately captured and classified, and accordingly should go through your testing strategy. Having vendor documentation not with you, again, itself a risk. So that would define your test strategy again.
So Sachin, I have a different take on this. Okay, so are
Yeah.
we still on the previous question?
Sorry.
Yeah, so I think there are two aspects based on my experience. Okay, so one is like where we are going with some COTS service provider who is giving us some manufacturing system. In that case, if he's selling to pharma, pretty much the software would be validated and that would be in his control. The situation comes, and I have come across this at some of our sites where they get some custom developed manufacturing system for the intended use, where the software is being purchased or manufactured from someone else, right? So how do we address that? Because the manufacturer of the system or the equipment is not building the software. Okay. So in that case, I think the right thing to do is to get the CSV team at your site or whoever it is involved right from start. Okay. And that needs to be built into the URS itself. So that when you are defining the requirements for that particular equipment and then floating a RFP or whatever to choose the partner, at that time itself, the software requirements need to be embedded and the validation requirements or part 11 for that matter. So if we do that, we will not end up in a situation where we have a system which is compliant, but the software is not. So I think getting the CSV team involved right at the start is the answer to avoid such issues later. That's what I feel.
Fantastic. I think Pranav, I couldn't agree more with you, and this probably is an answer to some of the. So I'll just say this in a different set of words for you, Pankaj. What Pranav said is that when you are procuring such things, it is good to involve your compliance team right in the beginning, right from the time when you decide to procure, or rather a step before that when you're defining your URSs, and make sure that all your checks and controls which are critical to that particular engineering equipment are there in your URS so that you can do your testing when you go live with that system. And also, you at times you have custom systems which are being built. So if you have your CSP team right aligned at that time, you would probably have lesser issues. But in and one more line which I want to add for you, Pankaj, here is that if you do not have trust the software, you have to do the testing all over for yourself. Because at the end of the day, it is being used in your premises. It is your responsibility that it is validated and fit for use. I mean, using even if you're using vendor documents, and this is a disclaimer I want to put to everybody on this call. guys, even if you're using your vendor documents, that doesn't absolve you from your responsibility to ensure the validation. It is still your responsibility because it is used in your business process. So you cannot, absolve yourself that if there is an audit and you say, hey, I bought it from vendor and he gave me this document, I trusted it. I'm sorry if it is not working. You can't do that. It's your responsibility. So your vendor assessment becomes very important. I have got some very, very interesting questions. I'm not sure I'll be able to pick them up. Each one of these is, no, we'll not take this one at this point of time. Or maybe I'll just answer it in 1 second without going to panelists that how do I ensure IQ in case of SaaS? You probably need not do that. If the vendor is giving you a QMS and the application is already live, you might not need to do an IQ in your SaaS environment, and you don't do it often. Okay, so there is an interesting question which I want to pick up, and this is coming from 1 second. Just let me scroll it back to that. Yes, Nitin Thorat, QC lead from Piramal. So, Piramal, this is Pranav. This is for you, as it comes from Piramal. From compliance perspective, how can one ensure under unscripted testing all requirements were tested and not compromised? Is the word I think you want to write, Nitin. Not compromised or not performed. I mean, this is a very interesting question. That when we are doing unscripted testing, there is a lot of focus which goes to testing the application and if the tester writes, because you don't capture every evidence there. So all you do is you say who performed the testing, what was tested, what were outcome, and you sign it up. So now the question here is that in case of there is a, how do you ensure that this testing was actually done and the form was just not filled? And before Pranav you answer, I'll go back to the first question I asked, and Devin used an interesting word called discipline. So I'll leave that here and over to you, Pranav, and then anybody else wants to add to that.
So I think Sachin, we have been saying it using different words. So I think Devin mentioned about discipline. I mentioned about the people aspect first in my first response, right? So it's the culture and the organizational change management. So as I said, like when we are doing CSA, it doesn't mean like that's a escape route to do less documentation or less testing, right? So as an organization, you need to have that internal culture where you are able to get that assurance yourself that whatever testing is being done as part of unscripted testing or whatever informal testing as you want to call it is done correctly. Okay, and then even if you are adopting CSA, that doesn't mean that you are not doing any kind of testing. You would still be doing some testing, and when you do your testing you would be able to very much verify, depending on how intelligently you have written your scripts, to know whether the unscripted testing was done by the previous teams or not, right? So that's how maybe you will be able to understand that. And then I think it's a learning curve which any organization has to go through. So over a period of time, if you want to ensure that you do less documentation, less formal testing where you capture less screenshots, then definitely you need to focus more on unscripted testing. And then there has to be certain trust also which you need to have, and that would be verified as part of your formal testing which you do. So I think over a period of time, it's a learning curve for all the functions, whether it's the IT team, testing team, validation team, or IT compliance team. But yeah, I think that's the way you can check whether all the requirements or all the aspects were tested. Because if and again, the reason why we are okay to do unscripted testing is because the risk is low. So for that matter, maybe Sachin, in your morning session, you gave the example of password, right? So what if the password doesn't expire after 90 days? On the 91st day, the sky is not going to fall. So if for some reason that is not tested as part of unscripted testing, the risk is still low, right? And that is precisely the reason why I have put it as unscripted testing. So I don't see that as a big challenge, okay, to go with.
Thanks, Pranav. And I'll just add one more interesting aspect to it, and I'm not sure Devin and Rajeev want to add to it. So, being a panelist, I'm also CSV, CSA enthusiast, so I can't stop myself from answering these things. So, excuse me for that as well. Very interesting thing I would also like to put, in case if you're doing unscripted testing, there are two parts of it. One is that when you are saying that you have executed a test case, the system, I'm assuming, is a 21 CFR Part 11 compliant, right? So if you have done some transaction, you executed something, there'll be definitely an audit trail behind it. And that serves as your evidence in case of any query from any of the auditors, or you want to investigate something. So if you have executed, say for example, you have done some transaction, is a in a learning management system. So when you do a transaction in a learning management system, it will leave an audit trail: who did, when he did, and what were the steps he followed. So there will be an audit trail for sure in the system, and that helps as an evidence. And that question which Nitin Thorat has asked was there on my list of questions as well. Rajiv or Divin,
So
you want
yeah,
to add
yeah,
anything?
yeah, yeah, Sachin. So just to add what Pranav mentioned, see, we directly don't land into the unscripted testing, right? We first understand with basis the URS where we stand, what are the risk areas, risk pointers into the requirements, and then we identify whether it is scripted to be done, whether it is unscripted to be done. Yeah. So when we anyway connect back, this is all about we are building the trace matrix there itself to understand whether all my requirements are being tested or not tested. So that is how you make sure your requirements are being tested over there, and you connect scripted testing has been defined and designed clearly saying all the requirements have been tested. Unscripted testing is something which you make sure you want to ensure all the error guessing, exploratory, ad hoc testing has been done to ensure it is furthermore strengthened to connect properly to make sure everything as a whole product and the system has been tested to make sure DI, patient and product, everything has been assured as a overall quality aspect. That's what my take here.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rajiv. Devin, you want to add?
Right. Yeah. I would just add to what Pranav, Rajiv, and Sachin, you yourselves said. We are not running away from testing, first of all, right? We are testing everything. It's just that the way we were documenting it. That is the only difference we are doing. In certain cases, we were over documenting things. For example, if I take the password route again, once you have configured your password testing, there used to be 8-10 steps that you used to document, saying that if is the password of the right length, is the password is using the right combinations, expiry, all of that. Right now what we are doing is we are still testing it to a certain extent, but we are not capturing all those screenshots and creating unnecessary documentation. So I would suggest to all the people here, nothing has changed. It's just that we are actually streamlining our documentation process overall.
Thanks, Devin, for that. One of the last questions from my list, and I'll pick up after that some questions from the question answer chat box there as well. And this is my favorite. Um, how can we use CSA in rapid transforming technologies such as MI and AL, where the software and logic changes in real time? How do we create validation model? What it means to say is like when you talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence, they are supposed to be intelligent. The software will change itself with every iteration of learning. How do you create a validation strategy for that? And how do you strategize? So anybody in the panel can pick that up, please.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
so
Yeah.
I
go ahead.
actually dealt with it to a certain extent, right, with the RPAs and certain intelligent bots that were developed. I mean, the best strategy would be just validating the learning process itself, because bot is also has a strategy through which it learns. So there is a code which tells bot how to learn and how to behave. That is the aspect that has to be targeted to ensure that one, the learning is validated, and then the overall system is validated. That would be my take on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pranav, you want to
So
add?
yeah, definitely. So I think the question was more about AI ML, right? And as Sachin, you rightly rephrased it, where the system itself train itself, right? And then the input determines what the output would be. So I think so I think there are two aspects. From CSA, CSV, I don't think there would be any difference because that's just the methodology of validation. But overall, from validation strategy itself, I think when we compare to the traditional technology, right, AI ML is different because the application trains itself and output depends on the input data. So unlike traditional applications for AI ML validation, data set is very important as per me. So it should be as close to the real life scenarios as possible. If the data is wrong or incomplete, the output will vary. So for such technologies similar to humans, like because AI ML, it is expected that they imitate what the humans in real life will do, right? So for humans, we do trainings. We can continuously train them. Machines we cannot train, and that's why we validate them, right? So these system needs to be periodically monitored and evaluated for failures. Maybe revalidation would be required or more periodic reviews and monitoring would be required, because they are not trainable for sure, and validation we do at a point of time, but then based on the data the system itself train itself and changes. So I think more periodic reviews would be required for such system. That's what my take is. But yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because that's something which we are all embarking on that journey now. So I think it's actually to be seen how it pans out.
Thanks, Pranav. Thanks, Devin. So, primarily, what our panelists are saying is that, first of all, there is not a lot of standard way to do this in case of MI and machine learning and artificial intelligence. And industry is actually still trying to figure out how do you handle these situations. But there can be some guidance. Devin said that you can actually validate the learning mechanism itself, how the protocol of updating itself will work. If you validate that, it will help some of the problems. And Pranav said that periodic validation or more frequent periodic validation of these applications will be one of the key things which can be done. There is a very good question which is come up, and I think a lot of people would like, must be thinking about it. Just give me 1 second. I just lost it while I was talking to you.
So Sachin, just one correction. I think I didn't mean periodic validation. I meant periodic monitoring or reviews which we need to do.
Yeah,
Validation will not be required periodically, because that would be a burden. But yeah, I think more periodic reviews and monitoring would be required compared to what we typically do for traditional systems.
okay.
Yeah.
My bad. Okay, I'm not able to find that question, but actually this question was that how the URS is going to be different for an application in CSA versus CSV. So that was a question which came in. If somebody would like to answer from the panel, Rajeev Bedage, you want to pick it up?
I think Sachin, couple of in last 1 hour we spoke multiple times the same things, right? It is not going to change whether it is a CSA or CSV. Your URS is going to be the same, right? You need to write your requirements clear, what you want as a product and the software coming in, and that is how it should be looked into. It doesn't mean CSA is going to change the URS saying we will be reducing the requirement writing, or we are reducing the template and everything is going to be there. We have to be clear what we are asking as a requirement, and that is how it is going to drive further, because that's the base document how it will be taken further. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Rajiv. I think that's a question which you have covered multiple times, so I'll not take too much of time on it. There is a question coming in from Suhash Deshmukh, and it says the privilege verification of equipment, is it mandatory requirement to test all privileges for each access level? So, any of the panelists, you want to take this?
I think access and privileges is actually the one of the high risk areas because it directly impacts your data integrity and stuff. Now it also depends what kind of system it is. If it's equipment, we usually have 3 levels of accesses there, which is supervisor, administrator, and operator. Now, a lot of your testing would be done at the configuration stage, which we call as OQ. At the PQ level, you can only test one of those, but you need to ensure that configurations within the systems are working appropriately when it comes to access. This is something which is configurable most of the time. It's not that out of the box you are getting it. Of course, you are going to rely on certain areas. However, I would say that because it's a high risk area, you should test all of your privileges.
I'll add something to what Devin said here. I think Pranav also has an opinion on that. So, if I'm assuming that you are talking of a category 3 or a 4 software, in most of the cases, what I would concentrate my testing more is on the configuration of the role and privileges associated with it. I would, in most of the cases, not all, please mark my words, not all. Most of the cases, I will rely on vendors' documentation that privileges work as intended, but how my roles are configured and what privileges are associated, that is something I will concentrate my testing on. And when you do that, your underlying framework is automatically getting tested. So that is how you strategize roles and privileges. And as Steven mentioned, this is one of the most critical areas. Most amount of ORTCs come around this when you mess up with your roles and privileges. In fact, If roles and privileges is messed up, your entire data integrity, systems integrity, performance, everything goes for a toss. So my idea is that I'll just repeat myself. You determine what are the roles, what are the privileges associated, and when you do an end-to-end testing, your functionality of those privileges gets automatically tested. And please use what you get from the vendor itself. Pranav, you had some opinion on that, or
Yeah,
have
in
you like?
fact, Sachin, I was going to say exactly the same thing, that there is no point in beating the same thing again and again. Like if we are, for example, getting Empower from Waters, I don't think we need to check when someone puts a lock for a project whether it is actually locked, because that's what the system built for. What we need to check whether the manager should have that privilege or supervisor should have that privilege. So whatever that role to privilege definition and matrix is defined needs to be validated, not the actual whether the system can do the job what it has supposed to do. So that we don't need to do. That's waste of time.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Pranav, for that. Now one more question we'll pick up here is, Darshan, do you want us to stop? I think we still have 4 5 minutes, right?
No, no, Sachin. I mean, it's good to see the questions getting answered. Uh, I was only suggesting we had someone who has raised a hand. They want to come on the video and ask a question.
Sure, sure.
So shall we invite them?
Yes, please. Ganesh
Great.
Kumar Fluri. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Abhay, can we invite Ganesh on stage, please?
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Ganesh. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Bandaraji and Devin sir, and Pranav sir, Rajeev sir. Thank you for your valuable insights. And as very so many questions have been covered, and so much of insight you have given to in last session. Okay, the way the Pharma 4.0 evolving. Say will Pharma 4.0 will give a challenges to CSA or CSA to be in line with Pharma 4.0. Can you make a bridge between both?
Okay. So, Ganesh, I think your question is that with Pharma 4.0 being talked about, how does it impact CSV and CSA in say, and how do you bridge CSA to Pharma 4.0? I'll answer this question later, but I would request the panelists, anyone wants to pick it up.
Yeah, again, I think we are into the same topic, whether it is in the 4.0 or 3.0 or 2.0. It is all about the practice, and the policy remains same. How do we validate the system, how it works, and how it delivers what is needed? That is how it is to be looked at. I mean, whether it is industry 4.0 or after 3 4 years will be, or 10 years will go somewhere 5.0. So policy, what we are looking at as a core of this entire process remains same. We need to validate what we are putting into the use, so that we're making sure it is not impacting my product, patient, and the data aspects. So it is absolutely, I don't see any major challenge, but yes, it will have some edge where we have to make sure it doesn't overburden again with respect to that industry 4.0, with respect to what we are implementing, and how it is not impacting my the documentation piece and the overall process what we follow at the ground.
Yeah. Thanks, Rajiv. Pranav, Devin.
Yeah, so I think we answered that maybe in the earlier question, that the strategy of validation might change, but whether it's CSA or CSV doesn't make any difference. So, like as we answered for AI ML, maybe we need to look at the data more or whatever. That, or in case of SaaS, what Devin explained, we need to focus more on supplier assessment. Those strategy of validation might change, but it's whether it's CSV or CSA would not make any difference for Pharma 4.0.
Yep. Thanks, Pranav. Devin, you were trying to.
Yes, same thing. I mean, CSA or CSV, it's the same thing. It has to be risk based. So if Pharma 4.0 is bringing in more risks through automation, you'll have to go ahead and do more testing around it. It doesn't make any difference, be it CSV or CSA.
Thanks. So the answer to your question, gentlemen, my panelists have said, I'll not repeat it. I think it's pretty well understood. I'll take one more question. This has got nothing to do with CSV or CSA. Okay, so the question which is there, is it necessary to perform risk assessment for every upgradation of software? I'll just answer it in 10 seconds. Depends on what you are upgrading, how big is the upgrade, do a risk assessment. If the upgrade is a kind of a bug fix or something, you might not need to do a risk assessment. But in case if it is a feature update, yes, a risk assessment and impact analysis is a must. The question I wanted to pick up, gentlemen, is, and it is not related to CSA. It is more of a strategy question from a validation perspective. The question says how this approach will differ if complete software. Sorry, not this one. Does system require additional access level for vendor when all the access rights are available to them? And there was a joint question to this. Somebody has asked that how do you manage a situation wherein you have to give an access to a vendor? So this is, I think, from Mr. P. Balakrishna. Is it acceptable to provide remote access to vendor once the completion of vendor qualification is done? So these two questions are related. Anybody wants to answer from the panel?
So it is, does system require additional access level for vendor when all access rights is available for admin? So maybe I didn't get this question clearly. So is he asking that whether the vendor requires access to the system? What exactly is the question?
I think, Pranav, the apprehension is, I think I'll just combine these two questions and ask on everybody's behalf, because I got this question in one of the questions in the morning also. So I think what people are trying to ask is, number one, is it okay to give remote access to the vendor? That's first thing. Second is that in most cases, the vendor has an admin access to your system. I'm speaking about mostly the OEM system where vendor is giving a remote support. So they have an OEM access, and OEM access, I mean, they have admin access, or rather, I'll say a word coming from an SAP background, they have the God privileges. They can do anything to the system. Now, this is a kind of a risk scenario. So, two things. One, is it okay to give them remote access? Second, how do you control a situation when the vendor has a God access to your system? So, no matter how good your validation is, he can come in and change anything in the system, and your validation goes for a toss. That's a concern I think people have.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I think there are required to have certain processes and controls. So one scenario is when the vendor is coming in your premises, especially the OEM vendors for doing some upgrades or maybe resolving some bugs or issues. So in that case, anyway, you have to give them access because they have the skill and knowledge to address that issue which your IT team might not have or technology team might not have. But then there is a certain process which needs to be followed where we need to create a unique ID of that individual. Then we need to raise a change control for the changes which the person is doing. The vendor has to give you a service report of what exactly the issue was, how it was addressed, and all that UMS elements need to be in place if we have to give them the access. The second part of the question is about the remote access. So that is also true. So now in last 2 years, most of us would have worked from home. So we know that it works. So if the vendor is able to connect remotely in a secured way to your environment without causing any security issues, so then I think that should be okay. And as long as the same process is followed where maybe someone from your side is overseeing what the activities are done, and then that is captured in the change control internally and through the service report externally by the vendor, I think that should be acceptable, because the reason why you are giving access in first place is because you are not able to resolve the issue. So the access has to be given, but there has to be certain checks and balances in the process to ensure that no unauthorized activity is done.
Thanks, Pranav. I think we exhausted the time, so I'll not go to the panelists. I'll just summarize what you said. That in case if you're giving a remote access to a vendor, you can of course do it, but make sure that you have right amount of controls and recording of what has been happening to the system, so that you can relate it back to your validation which you have done. I think with that we have exhausted our time. Thank you everyone for being on the panel. Devin, Pranav, Rajiv, it was amazing to have you all on the panel. I think it was wonderful. EBM for arranging this. Thank you everyone for those who have asked the questions. It was very good.
Thank you.
Stay safe, and hope to see you soon. Over to you, Darshan.
Sure. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sachin. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you all the panel members. Thank you, Sachin, for moderating this. This was very insightful. A lot of questions being discussed here, and that is what we always like to see on a panel with us as well. So thank you so much for your time. Great. So this brings us to the end of an interesting day where we've had a lot of interactions, a lot of questions being answered. Again, for all the audience, I know there are quite a few questions which are not answered. We will share the answers for these with you. We would be sharing with our speakers, our panel members here, we will share the questions with them. And as and when we start getting the answers, we will share it back with